I remember one week, I think we had 12 people that passed away, and, I would come in and I would see nurses in the corner just crying and breaking down. And, I don't think people really understand how much, people in that facility went through.
Hey, Islanders, and welcome to episode 89 of the Camano Voice. Today I speak with a family doctor at Providence Hospital. Please welcome Dr. James Grierson. Hi, I'm Brandon Erickson, and you're listening to the Camano Voice podcast, where I interview folks around Camano Island and beyond. If you want to stay up to date on events, businesses, and even hear a little history of this area, subscribe to this podcast and share with your friends. Thanks for listening. Hey, Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice, where we release a new episode every Tuesday. On this episode, I got to speak with Dr. James Grierson, or Dr. Jimmy, as many people know him. One of my things that I really enjoy about being able to do this podcast is to be able to kind of brag on different people that I get to interview and talk with. And talking with Dr. Jimmy, I just learned, I learned a lot, but just seeing what he does within his community. He's been a family physician or a family doctor at Providence for about 5 years, and he was working in the San Camano area before that as a family doctor. And their family has been heavily involved in the community. His daughter actually worked for us for a short amount of time before she went off to college and took off. But it was great having her here at the marketplace. But one of the things that stood out so much in this interview is just to become a doctor of any level is a lot of work and a long road to get there. And then once you get there, it's also a very difficult job. Like, you just continue on, and it's a lot of work. And so not only is he a family doctor, so already has a full-time job in that, but he also worked to start the Free Harbor Clinic here in the Stanwood area. And it was like the amount of time and energy he put into that was a lot. And then on top of that, he volunteers and helps out with other things as well. He's also the director of the medical director at Josephine's Caring Community Center. And so, he's so involved in so many different parts within this community. I sometimes get overwhelmed with what I have going on. And then I talk to people like this that are just overperforming at such a high level, and completely out of care and, humility, and just, again, care for this community and really, So all of that will come out in this interview. You'll really understand what I'm talking about here. This is a little bit of a longer interview, but it's totally worth it. Just, again, hearing all of his background and then what he's been involved in this community. You're really going to enjoy this podcast. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Jimmy. Hey, Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice. Today I'm here with a family doctor at Providence. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Jimmy Grierson.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Brandon.
Yeah. So before we get started, tell us a little bit about Dr. Jimmy.
Will do. So a couple of things. I didn't grow up on Camano. I grew up in both Montana, Eastern Montana, as well as later on graduated from high school from the Portland area. Went to college at Pacific Lutheran in Tacoma, and then went to medical school at the University of Washington.
Okay.
And then I've actually been Stanwood was my first job out of residency, so started in Stanwood in 2004, and have lived on the island since that time.
Okay, very cool. So what part of Montana did you grow up in then?
So I grew up in Eastern Montana, a little town called Miles City, Montana, which is actually has some pretty cool history of its own. My great-great-grandparents came over from Scotland and started a ranch, a horse ranch that sold horses to the cavalry. The cavalry was based at a place called Fort Keogh, which is now Miles City, and that's where Custer was based, and that's where Ulysses S. Grant was based.
Okay.
Yeah, and then in the 1900s, it changed to like a cattle ranch, and I've had family there ever since.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
Nice. So, is most of your family back in Montana still?
My dad's side of the family is in Montana, and my parents are divorced. My mom lives in Oregon.
Okay.
And I've got one sister who still lives in Montana, and one sister who lives in Oregon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Very cool. So then, when did you end up moving to Portland then?
So I moved to Portland kind of at the middle of middle school.
Okay.
And then completed high school there. So I went to a little Christian school called Westside Christian High School in Portland.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. So was that a big change for you moving from Montana, kind of middle of nowhere, to Portland?
Well, middle school is always a little bit of a rough time, I think, to move anywhere. And so, it was. It was just, everywhere you go in the United States, there's just different personalities, and it was the big city as far as I was concerned. So, no, but it's been a great experience. Really loved the time I spent in Portland.
Yeah, very cool. So then you went to school. So then you went to school in Tacoma, you said?
Yeah. So I went to college at Pacific Lutheran right out of high school. Majored in biology and minored in creative writing.
Okay. Was at this point, was becoming a doctor, was that on your list, or were you kind of just exploring still?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, my dad was a rancher / general and trauma surgeon. So he, I know, right? Brenda's giving me funny looks. So, I always really liked medicine because growing up in a small town, you get to do a lot. My stepmom was the head of the emergency room, and if I needed to be babysat, they would just drop me off with the nurses at the hospital, and I would wander around and get in trouble a little bit. And in a small town way back then, also got to help my dad out in surgery a little bit, and really enjoyed it. But I didn't want to jump into something just because my dad did it, and so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out who I was. And in high school, I'd worked as a nurse's aide at a hospital and at a nursing home. I'd done a lot of kind of volunteer work. And I really found that I loved a couple of different things. I loved the kind of complexity of medicine, trying to figure out kind of interesting problems. I love the people part. I love the teaching. And then later on in college, I really realized that I kind of like the counseling part. And so I kind of thought, do I want to be a teacher? Do I want to be a pastor? Do I want to go into the sciences? And then I came to realize that my chosen profession, and where I am now in family medicine, is really a perfect blend of all those things.
Yeah. Cool. How does that kind of all combine together then?
So, as a family doc, especially as kind of a full spectrum family doc, you end up doing a lot with people. So whether it's, delivering babies, taking care of little kids, taking care of adults, or being part of kind of end of life, you just have an opportunity to kind of be part of people's families. And when you're a part of people's families, I think that just kind of comes naturally.
Yeah.
People get sick. They have a lot of interesting health conditions. Trying to make sure that they get the best possible care and the correct diagnosis kind of really fulfills that kind of scientific part, figuring out the problem. But then, being with them during the difficult things, the depression, the losses that they have, helping them, through those difficult times or trying times. That's really where a lot of the counseling comes in. It's kind of always been my thought and my realization that, people need to be loved.
Yeah.
When it really comes down to it. And, it's just such an awesome opportunity to be able to show God's love to people, being a family doc, and help them through that kind of counseling part. And especially, when things are really difficult, there's a lot of death in our profession, and there's a lot of scary things that happen. And then I just love the education piece as well. So, it's just a great chance to, talk to people about making good decisions, about, what things can kind of make them healthy.
Yeah.
Helping them, understand, why we do certain things, right?
Yeah.
Like why is it important to get a COVID vaccine?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you separate, misinformation or disinformation from, kind of scientific basis of fact? And,
Right.
and so, no, it's just a great privilege. There's their quote that says, if you find a job you love, you'll never work a day in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very much how it is for me.
Very cool. So going back then, I know I kind of took us on that tangent, but going back, you studied biology. What kind of tipped the scale to make you pursue family medicine then?
Yeah, so my dad was a surgeon, and, a perfect description of a surgeon is, or someone who wants to be a surgeon is, there's an interesting medical problem, and the person's completely anesthetized, right? And so, for me, I just love I love the person part of it.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, if I was to like take out a gallbladder like all day long, or do a colonoscopies all day long, I get pretty bored. So I think I've got maybe a little bit of ADHD built in, but I just love the variety. Family medicine could also be called kind of controlled chaos in a way, where there's, you've got 3 exam rooms and all sorts of things kind of going on the side. And so I tend to thrive in those environments.
Yeah.
I kind of like the craziness.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's part of what makes it fun. And it's those personalities that make it fun as well.
Yeah. Well, I think anytime you insert kids into the mix, usually chaos ensues.
Indeed. Indeed.
Okay, very cool. So you started in Stanwood. So you decided to go to the family medicine.
Correct.
You graduate. What kind of happened next?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So medical school is 4 years, and so I did 4 years at the University of Washington, and then did rotations around the Seattle area, and actually in Montana as well. And then after the 4 years at the U in med school, then did a 3-year residency in Vancouver, Washington.
Okay.
And so, and worked in some of the Portland hospitals, and then in Vancouver, Washington, kind of learning the nuts and bolts of family medicine specifically.
Yeah.
And then this is kind of a great story. I'd spent the last 7 years kind of dragging my wife around, and I just said, look, this doesn't need to be all about me. Where do you want to live? We could live anywhere you want in the United States. And so we were looking at a few, kind of few job openings and some postings, and, she kind of said, what do you want? I said, I'm from Montana, and I want to be able to drive by cows on my way to work. And she said, I want to be within 30 minutes of Costco. And so, so we just found in a journal this, this job opening in Stanwood, and we came to visit, and actually I had a couple of friends from college that lived here. So
Okay.
JP DeBoer and Kaya DeBoer.
Okay.
JP's he works for Windermere, and
Yeah.
and they loved it. We also had read an article about the Rawls family that at the time owned a basil company
Okay.
here on Camano.
Wow. Okay.
And the funny thing is we moved in, and our daughter Hannah went to school with all their kids, and for both families, and everyone's kind of been fast friends ever since.
Yeah. Very cool. So what was the actual job opening in Stanwood then?
It was for a full spectrum family medicine doc. And so Carol Hooksema, who's married to Pat Clark, they had run the clinic at that time,
Okay.
and they were just looking for another person to step in. And so we actually ended up probably even doing more medically at that time. We did a lot of hospital call. We would kind of run the ICU. We would do a lot of procedures. Obviously, we're delivering a lot of babies here in Stanwood at that time as well. And just like you, being able to kind of interview a lot of people that kind of live in the area, was just kind of a great opportunity to really meet a lot of the old timers as well, and
Yeah.
learned a lot about the area too. And I used to call them all the road people, the people that have the names that match up with the roads.
Yes.
So got to meet a lot of them and hear some great stories. So so that was our first job out of residency, and it was great.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. So how long were you there then?
I was in Stanwood for 12 years.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. And then what kind of prompted the change from there?
So, the big thing is the systems were changing a little bit. We'd been bought out by Skagit. Dr. Hooksum had retired at that time. There were some other opportunities that came up. Providence really kind of fit the mission for my life, taking care of the poor and vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And it just seemed like a great opportunity. And so actually, kind of at that time, our clinic had kind of disbanded a bit, and 3 of us went over to Providence, and another couple retired, and then Dr. Andelin moved into emergency medicine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I can say, because we've had different family members and stuff who have had to go to Providence and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
Every time we've gone there, it's been it's never a good reason that you're going to a hospital.
Yeah.
But while we are there, the staff, everyone, it's been such a great environment to be in, despite whatever circumstances are going on. The care they provide, I feel like within the area, Providence is definitely one that we really admired how well the hospital and the group, the staff, everyone worked there.
Absolutely. And, Providence has almost a Disneyland-like attitude of, in Disneyland, even the executives are picking up the trash. Mm-hmm. At Providence, there's not part of the mission statement, but part of their values is know me, care for me, ease my way. And so, the goal is really, how do we continue to put patients first? Not only the people we take care of, but, how do we, put our, more disadvantaged patients, or those people that don't have the best access to medical care, how do we care for them as well? And I've really appreciated that. And, when you work for an organization where that's the overriding mission, things just go well, and good patient care happens.
Yeah. How does that work when you have people that are, whether they're uninsured or aren't able to get good insurance? How does that all operate? How do you guys kind of live out that mission statement? Yeah,
so Providence is actually the only hospital in our local Puget Sound area that will provide up to 100% charity care if people need it.
Wow.
Other hospitals in the region may provide up to 50%, but they'll still send you to collections for everything else.
Wow.
And so, and then Providence does a really good job of working with outside organizations, helping to support them, and help them support that mission as well. So it's nice in a way to be part of an organization that is not just has only their capital here in or all their money just locally. They're a larger organization over several states, and so when certain regions are struggling more, they can put more resources towards one particular region. So there's been that financial stability that has not always been present in other organizations or other hospital groups or clinic groups locally. So it's allowed them to kind of, I think, stay true to that mission.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you're still with Providence then?
I'm still with Providence, correct. And I've been there for about 5 years.
Okay, very cool. So continuing on then, you also, that's what you do on a professional level, but you've also helped with some other nonprofits and stuff in the area. And one in particular, the Safe Harbor Free Clinic. Can you tell us more about that and how that came about? Yeah,
that's, obviously that is Brandon has known me well, and this has been a big part of my life for the past 12, 13 years. Again, I've always really had a heart for those who, need care and can't get that. And had been going on a number of overseas mission trips with Camano Chapel, to Haiti and such, and then also with Stanwood Foursquare in places like the Dominican Republic and Papua New Guinea, and those are just really amazing experiences. And was with a group of people who had done that, and the thought kind of came up that if people are suffering thousands of miles away, and we can step in and do some things to help get them on the right track, help set up clinics, help teach and educate them. Is there any of that need in our local community?
Yeah.
And this is kind of right at the time again where smaller clinics were becoming part of larger healthcare organizations. And it used to be, and if you grew up here 20 or 30 years ago or longer, if someone was really having a hard time and couldn't afford medical care, the people in the clinic would just kind of take care of them. Doctors would write off things. There'd be things that could be done. Maybe we take a pie or some cookies for for services rendered, and but that suddenly became kind of illegal.
Right.
Especially working at that time for a clinic owned by a public hospital district. So, and then medicine became a lot more expensive. So I think everyone has seen their healthcare premiums kind of go up. There's been an increasing amount of people who have lost healthcare, and probably what's not talked about as much is there's an even larger group of people who, even though they have healthcare, can't afford it. So just because you have insurance doesn't mean you can afford your $8,000 deductible before it starts to kick in a little bit. Right. So we had started to kind of see more people struggle around the Stanwood Camano area, and I think on the outside, I think people might think that this area is more affluent than it is. Mm-hmm. But if you really look at the demographics, especially more towards Stanwood, that definitely is not true. And so, we kind of thought, okay, let's think about the idea of a free clinic in Stanwood. And the story kind of goes that I got elected to be the one to kind of do that. And I had thought, I'd worked in a free clinic in residency in Vancouver. And so I said, okay, I'm going to call them up and kind of say, like, see, what is it like to start a free clinic? Is that a doable thing? Is it, what do you think? And so I called up the director down in Vancouver, and I said, I've got a group of people that's kind of interested. Maybe we come down to visit, or you could tell us a little bit more. And he said, that's a great idea, but what you should really do is go to the Washington State Free Clinic Conference. And I'm like, oh, I didn't even know there was such a thing. So I said, okay, tell me more about that. And he's like, well, it's tomorrow, and it's in Richland, Washington. And he gave me the information. And I thought, okay. And, for me, this free clinic business was a little bit of trying to live out God's purpose trying to live out God's purpose of showing love to your neighbor. Yeah. And, but I was a little bit like Job, if you know about, not Job, but Jonah from the Bible. If you know about Jonah. So Jonah was this guy who back then was kind of a pastor in a sense, kind of back then, and God had kind of tasked him with doing a few things. And he kind of wanted to do it, but there were these people in Nineveh that he really didn't like. And so he kind of, tried to get far away as possible. And that's where the whole part where the whale comes in and, and spits him out. But and the reason I kind of call it a bit of a Jonah moment is that I was pretty busy. I had 3 small kids, and I was like, man, my wife is going to kill me if I get really a lot more involved. And I'm not sure I'm really up to this. I'm not sure I'm good enough for this. I mean, I think your brain kind of fills you with a lot of self-doubts and, why do I want to do this? And so I thought, oh, great. God is closing the door, right? Like this is going to be it. And so I hung up the phone, and I got back from lunch, and our very next patient was this guy named Larry Weston. And I'd known him well. He was a retired businessman. I'd helped him through some health problems, and I'd mentioned this idea of a free clinic to him before, and he kind of thought maybe it was cool. And I said, "Hey, Larry, I don't know you that well, but you were kind of interested in this free clinic idea we had." And he's like, "Yeah, I think that's a good idea." And I'm like, "Well, how'd you like to pay your own way and go to Richland, Washington tomorrow and learn some more about it?" And he said, "Absolutely, I would love that. That'd be an amazing opportunity." And I was just flabbergasted. So he went to Richland, Washington, and came back and got some information. And we were pretty jazzed. And so we started. We kind of started this startup board, if you will, and we actually were awarded a grant from an organization that helps people start free clinics.
Okay.
This guy is oil billionaire from Texas, and kind of started out. And but in my heart, I was like, "Oh man, this is still, I don't know, right? Like, yeah, that was pretty neat, but is this really what, is this really what the Lord would have for me? Is this really still a good idea?" And so then I had probably one of the more remarkable things that ever happened to me, which is, we had met on a Saturday night, and we had figured out that if we're going to start a board, we actually have to have something called board insurance.
Okay, yeah.
And as a clueless doctor, I was like, "Really? I don't know what that's about." So, we had gotten some sort of quote that got delivered to us on Saturday. It was like, you need like $438.12. And so we're like, okay, well, we can all kind of pitch in and figure that out. And then we had actually gotten an anonymous check from someone like postmarked on Friday. It said, I know you're starting up this free clinic, and I was just kind of prompted to give you this amount of money. And it was like $418.12 or whatever it was. And I was like, oh my goodness, like this has got to be something we got to do. And so ever since then, the people involved with that, including me, I think have just really poured a lot of heart and soul in that. And we started out doing a clinic once every couple of weeks on a Friday night, to now we have clinic days that are 3 or 4 times a week.
Wow.
And so, I'll never forget our very first patient had driven from Pasco, Washington, and she had a breast lump. And she had, I think we'd had a couple of news articles that got picked up on the EP, and she had read about it. And she drove all the way over, and she waited outside our door for 6 hours. And that, I think, really kind of cemented to me. It's like, yeah, there are people that are much more desperate for healthcare than you think. And as part of that journey, I've really come to realize that we all have very unique talents and training. Not everyone's a doctor, but everyone should try to figure out what sort of talents they have, and how do you kind of give back?
Yeah.
How do you give back to your community? And so a little bit more about the free clinic. We a couple of the really small stories is, one of the things we needed was we need some labs, right? Because it's hard to diagnose things if you can't tell what people's labs are like sometimes, right? Like I don't know, how's your thyroid? I don't know. So we talked with LabCorp, and LabCorp said, this free clinic idea is really cool. We'll give you a 10% discount on labs. And we were like, 10% is really generous, but we want it for free, completely for free. And you're big enough that you can do this, and you should do this. And they came back a day later and they said, okay, we'll do it for free. And so, for the last 10 years, we've had free labs from LabCorp, and we've just had so many people that have been so gracious and donated services to the clinic. North Sound Physical Therapy with Carl Hadeen, they'll see a patient of ours for 1 or 2 visits that have physical therapy needs. We've had local counselors that have seen patients. Some of our optometrists in town have seen people. We've now grown to the part that we have a number of kind of clinics within clinics. So we have twice a week, we have acute care clinics on Wednesdays and Fridays where we kind of see whatever people need kind of come in the door, and we have appointments for those.
Okay.
And then we have a number of specialty clinics. We have a podiatry clinic manned by podiatrists. We have a cardiology clinic with a cardiologist. We have a general surgery clinic that to this point has been manned by a transplant and general surgeon.
Okay.
We have an ultrasound clinic. We have an ultrasound tech from Prov who comes over and helps do that. We just started a women's clinic.
Wow.
Where we're taking care of women by women who especially that kind of need preventative sort of care, and that's actually our newest clinic, and we're really excited about this. We had two really sad stories. We had a gal who had a breast lump for a couple of years, who didn't have insurance and didn't think that she could get care anywhere, and we saw her, we got her, we got her connected for a mammogram. She had a breast cancer. We got her connected with treatment. She was a local gal who was caring for her two grandchildren, who are currently in middle school and one's in elementary school. And she passed away. And then we had another patient with cervical cancer, who also had a grade schooler who ultimately ended up passing away. And spending time with people as they suffer and is really life changing. And having moms or grandmothers who look you in the eye and say, "Can you make sure that my kids are okay when I die?" We just said, this can never happen again in our community. And so really excited that we're able to provide, services like that.
Yeah.
So we do those things. Right now, we've been partnering with the food banks to make sure that those people who don't have internet access or maybe disadvantaged with their communication can get COVID vaccines.
Okay.
So we've been able to administer that. We've done outreach work with some of the migrant camps over times. We've been involved with policy making on both a local and a national level, which has been exciting. And then also have partnered with another group I work with called Mercy Watch. Mercy Watch provides care to the homeless in Everett, both street care as well as at a number of shelters. And so we kind of serve as their brick and mortar operation and help get them some free medications and help share staff and best practices. So that's also been kind of a fun corollary to what we do at the free clinic.
Nice. Yeah, and I think specifically like the women's clinic and stuff like that, like the changes, and you know this better than I do, but like women go through so much more in their lives than men. Apart from just like watching the kids, which is a massive job, but like physically, like throughout their lifetime, they go through so many more changes that they have to deal with, and body and things like that. And it's so hard. It's much more difficult to pinpoint like this is unusual versus this is normal because of just my body's changing.
Yeah. I would very much agree with that. I would actually go a step farther and say, 30+% of women also suffer from domestic violence. Women also bear the brunt of families that have dissolved, because usually they're caring for kids as well. And so there's a lot of obstacles I think that women have to deal with besides just anatomic and physiologic differences that require some additional types of healthcare.
Yeah, for sure. So that's really cool that you guys have been able to do that. I think I'm pretty sure Mike Dame, our local CPA, he's been involved in that.
Mike is an amazing guy. I love Mike Dame. So I'll put a plug in for that. He took over from Terry Greer. He's a local CPA, and we've been so fortunate to just have people on our board and obviously our volunteers as well who just have a heart for people and for serving and for the community. A couple of other people on our board, Tim Petzel, who's the pastor at Stanwood Foursquare.
Okay.
Brett Reed, who is a pastor at Camano Chapel. We have, let me think of a couple other community leaders. Don Timmerman, who's a local real estate agent, who's on our board. Previously, jump back a little bit with the story. Larry Weston, actually, who I told you helped us start by going on the evaluation to find out about the Free Clinic Association. He was actually our first director, our first executive director, and then Julie Vess, longtime executive director, and really, I would say, kind of the matron of the clinic. Now obviously runs the Stanwood Senior Center.
Okay.
And so a lot of great people. One of the things that's really great about the Stanwood Camano community is that people work very well together. And Brandon, I know you know that. Just kind of living in the community, it's been pretty amazing. But our current executive director, who's also wonderful, Sandy Solis, who has kind of had her own local photography business. She meets on a regular basis with the directors of other nonprofits, with the food banks, with the resource center, with SCAF. And so, we continue to network and help each other out in the best ways that we can. Currently, we're involved also with the Making Life Work program. If you don't know much about that, that's started with a grant from the United Way. It's administered through the Stanwood Camano Area Foundation, where we're taking a certain number of families in poverty and kind of wrapping our arms around them, helping them with everything from, childcare to job training to medical care, trying to move them from the station that they're at, kind of out into a better world. And that started when really from a letter the food bank had gotten that had said, "Thank you for taking care of our family for the last 40 years." And that really kind of hit a nerve with a lot of us in the community. We just said, you know what, we have to do better than this. Someone shouldn't have to, survive off the food bank for 40 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. So you've been doing this then, and then you also are involved with Josephine's, correct?
Yeah, correct. So I've been involved with Josephine's for the past 17 years now. So starting to date me a little bit. So I'm one of the medical directors.
Okay.
Over at Josephine's. So one of the things I'm also really involved with through Providence and through some of my other work is teaching medical residents and medical students. And so I do have residents rotate with me when I'm at Josephine's on Fridays. They also rotate with me at the Free Clinic as part of a community medicine month. And then I also teach them separately a procedure clinic at my clinic. And then, I still deliver quite a few babies and I attend on the OB wards and help precept them with obstetrics. So, so that's a little bit of part of what I do at Josephine's as well.
Yeah. So, since it was all over the state, when everything was going on with COVID and everything, I'm assuming you were extremely involved in okay, now how do we handle it now that this is going on? How did you kind of start breaking that down of dealing with the COVID outbreak and everything? Yeah, so I'm
an early adopter, and I was also an early adopter of COVID. So I actually contracted COVID at the end of February, beginning of March of last year, and so before it was even really a thing. And so I was fortunate that I was a physician. I could say, look, I've got symptoms. I'm around people. I want to be tested just to make sure. And sure enough, I was positive, and probably, at that time, maybe it come through the facility. But it was, this year has been really difficult in a way. So we started out with an outbreak as has been well publicized at Josephine's, kind of March, April of last year. We had another pretty significant outbreak this fall. It was a lot of scrambling because, COVID has been kind of a learn as you go sort of condition. We were at Josephine's, we were not unlike a lot of other healthcare facilities where we did not have enough personal protective equipment for staff. Funding to try to deal with everything that's needed was difficult. Coming up with infection control protocols. I I have to be honest, I was a little bit naive. I thought, wow, this is a big national thing. I'm sure that, I'm sure the government is going to try to step in and try to help with some of this. But
Yeah.
it was pretty much every man for themselves. And so
Yeah.
every place had to figure out how they were going to deal with these. And again, Providence was really amazing. I actually had the CEO at that time of Providence called me up and she says, Jimmy, what do you guys need? And I'm like, Kim, this is Kim Williams, who also lives on the island. And I said, Kim, we need, we need like 100 thermometers and oximeters, and we need gowns and gloves. And she says, you know what? We will take care of you. And
Wow.
Within 24 hours, there was a semi that pulled up that had all this equipment that came out on pallets. And I mean, that was never publicized. Providence didn't make a big deal about that.
That's crazy.
But again, it's just part of people stepping up in the community to take care of people.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, no, I think, I think everyone knows the government is very slow at moving and doing things like, getting
Correct.
things done.
Correct.
And when emergencies strike, for some reason we're like, well, they'll come up with something. Like, they're not just going to leave us hanging. And yet that speed doesn't really increase when emergencies strike. They're still moving at their pace of like, well, we got to do this and follow this step. And so, like, it was, for me, I've been able to see so many members within the community, even right now, like with the Camano Fire Department and Camano Center, the way they're handling and getting through with the vaccine distribution is incredible how they've been able to do it, and especially because there's no official oversight government here.
Right.
This is based on what they've decided, like, this is the best practice of how we think we can do it. And they are exponentially faster than other areas in this region that have full government funding, full hospital support, different things like that.
Yeah, and and again, I think we do have a great community and a great community government, but I think there's just a certain degree of bureaucracy that comes along with that, and and things just don't work as fast or as well as you want. But again, what's just the neatest thing about the Stanwood Camano area is that people do work together and they communicate. And so, for example, at Josephine's, we were just able to call up the fire chief and say, okay, let's have some protocols in place for when you guys need to come over, and how can we keep your firefighters safe, and what can we do to make sure that we're contacting you at the right time and such, and that's worked really well.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to add is just a huge shout out and thank you to the people of Stanwood Camano to really support the workers at Josephine's. And initially there was a little bit of this kind of coming back from Vietnam feeling, which is all these people at Josephine's, they must have gotten it from the people who work there, and you should try to find all those people and fire them. And people were getting ostracized. But on the inside, there was dozens of healthcare workers, nurses, and food staff and such who they care so much for the residents that are there.
Yeah.
And I felt a little bit like President Biden, because medically there's not a lot I can do for people, right? I can give them oxygen, I can put them on steroids, I can treat as many other things, but but we had over 40 deaths at Josephine's, and a lot of those were long-term residents, and those were deaths that much like you see in the news, family weren't around, and so you had nurses that were FaceTiming last goodbyes to people, and trying to coordinate things. And I remember one week I think we had 12 people that passed away. Wow. And I would come in and I would see nurses in the corner just crying and breaking down. And I don't think people really understand how much people in that facility went through.
Yeah.
When you sign up to work at a long-term care facility, it's not like you're the crack ER nurse that expects to see a lot of craziness and death, and you just want to take care of people, and you've got a great heart, and you may not even have some of the the taught and learned coping skills that other people in healthcare facilities have spent so many years training for. And I think it was just extra hard. Plus, that part of kind of the shame blame game that kind of came apart about. But again, people stand with Camano. They'd sent cards. They sent food. I can't tell you how much that meant to the people.
Yeah. Well, and I think I was thinking about this when that was all going on, of just having to, like, you getting home from work, and because, for the staff that were there, they don't know what's going on. We don't still know how COVID's being tracked or traced or passed on. So they're going home and sleeping alone. They're going into a quarantine area of their house, sleeping for a few hours, and then having to go back to work and going back into like a war zone, and just, living that type of life of having to go back to work into this, this lockdown place where it feels very secluded and alone. And like, my heart went out to those people that had to keep going in, day out. During that.
Well, and a couple of things, as much as people wear masks, and as great as that is, COVID is still extremely contagious, no matter what you do. And, we ultimately had, between staff and residents, a couple hundred people at Josephine's that had COVID. And so, when you're a nurse, for example, going into that facility, you just know you're going to get it. And those people resign themselves to the fact that I know I'm going to contract COVID, and, they put their lives on the line for that.
Yeah.
And, they were also stepping up for, the people that were out because of COVID. There was a big staff shortage for a while because so many people were sick, and the need was so much higher that people were pulling double shifts, and like you said, quarantining from their families or not being at home. We had staff that were sick enough to be hospitalized and near death. Fortunately, we didn't have any staff members that passed away, but there's people that continue to suffer. We still have staff that probably have permanent loss of taste and smell. We have staff that may have some permanent cardiac damage from this. So, but people did that because they felt it was their duty to take care of the residents.
Yeah. Wow. So one of the questions I actually had was, based on the way COVID interacts and the way it's been spread and things like that, what are some like key things about COVID that made it different from past? We usually have flu seasons. We've got little things like that happen, but then we had things like the swine flu and things like that. What made COVID different in the sense of, like, it became this global pandemic versus more localized and not quite as contagious and everything?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, swine flu was a real wake up. Back in 2008 when swine flu came through, at the clinic in Stanwood, we were part of the preparations for that. Many people might remember some of the mass vaccinations we did for swine flu at Heritage Park, that were coordinated with the fire department. The emergency management system, kind of was set up for kind of scary triage. If something like, the flu of the early 1900s, 1918, if things were like that. Swine flu was a rough thing, but it wasn't as contagious as we had thought that it might be. And so, the 1918 flu was extremely contagious, as you have heard of. The one thing about flu is that it also follows pretty much a pattern. There's some pretty, consistent symptoms of fever and, cough and chills and things like that. COVID is really the great imitator, right? COVID can be anything. COVID can be completely asymptomatic. COVID can be dramatically, people get sick, really sick. It could be diarrhea. It could be fever. When I had COVID, I didn't have a fever. And that was one of the original diagnostic criteria for people to get tested. Well, if you do have a fever. Wow. It's like, no, I just have a runny nose and a cough. And I don't know if this is my allergies or my asthma or, if this is something else. And so it's easier to spread in the fact that people don't realize that they may have it or such. And then it just is that much more contagious as a respiratory virus. And so, there are some viruses that are really contagious. For those of you who remember the days of chickenpox, chickenpox is a virus, and everybody had chickenpox. Like it wasn't even a thought that you wouldn't have it at some point. So, thankfully, when you get it young, it's not as big of a deal.
Right.
But I think it just goes to show you that there are some viruses that, no matter what you do, they're just kind of out there.
Yeah. Yeah. So then with, one thing I think hopefully comes out of this beneficial wise is like, I think within communities and stuff, we live in a society within the U.S. of like, just push through it, like just get past it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't make a big deal about it. Just make it through. So that sometimes gets reflected in the way that people interact with sicknesses in general.
Mm-hmm.
There's many times where, not within our business because it's food service, so we have to be a lot more careful. But, when I worked as an engineer and stuff, people would come in like, I wasn't feeling so great, but, I'm just going to try and knock this work out. And people just go in when they're sick. And, they don't take a second thought, like, no, or like at church, like people come in and they're like, well, my kid had a runny nose, but, just kind of, it's fine. He's not really sick. But, like, these different things, and we're like, no, I'm pretty sure he's sick. Like, please stay home. So I think there's some awareness that's been built with that. But one of the other things questions I have is, how do you think this kind of shapes us looking forward when it comes to, like, say 5 years from now? What do you kind of see as the long-term effects of not just COVID, but the result of things of COVID?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brandon. So you're right. A couple of things about your first statement, which is, there is a little bit of that bravado, right? Like you're going to go to work, you just suck it up and keep going. But really, the economic reality is there's a lot of people that can't afford to take off work, right? They don't have financial ability, or they don't have sick time, or or they don't have childcare. There's all of those real realities that make it difficult in the U.S. to do that specifically. And then, like you said, I think there's just differences in opinion as to, what is sick exactly. And it still astounds me sometimes when people come in. I'm like, you are really sick. And so different people have different thresholds, for what they feel illness really is. And it's not obvious to people sometimes as well. COVID has been, and really when this is all said and done, I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about how COVID has changed our society. And so, I think one of the obvious things is it's really shown us that there's a real divide, I think, in people and how they approach some of the requested government regulations. I think that has really been more of a schism in our society, and perhaps worsened a lot just by the politics of the recent election. I'm just struck by how people react to basic public health measures when if you thought about things in the 1950s when we had a polio outbreak, people would have been completely different. And so, I really feel for those people that are trying to make decisions, because even I've been frustrated at times. I've got kids that I want to get back to school and such. And so I kind of look at it in this analogy, which is, if you think about a freeway, if you impose a lot of restrictions, like let's say we only let cars go 5 miles an hour on the freeway, guess what? The number of deaths from automobile accidents is 0, right? You're doing great, but you can't get anything done. You have no commerce. You can't get your job done. You can't get where you want to go.
Right.
On the flip side, if we say, hey, do whatever you want on the freeways, there's no rules, and drive as fast as you want, guess what?
Yep.
There's going to be a lot of accidents. Those accidents are going to block the freeway. You're going to actually have some decreased productivity in that, and plus a lot of deaths. And so I think coronavirus is the same way. And I think we've seen this play out over different states, which is if you completely lock down your economy, yes, you've got less deaths, but you have a lot of other unintended consequences, financial and psychological. But if you're reckless and you just don't pay attention to this and don't have any safeguards in place, a lot of people die. And And the thing about COVID is, it's not just, obviously you're more at risk when you're, older. When you're 75, there's a 21% chance of mortality potentially, right?
Yeah.
And so, but this is a disease that can do bad things to anybody.
Yeah.
And so, it's just kind of scary that way. And I've seen a number of kids in my practice that have really suffered with depression. We've had some suicidal kids that have really been a big concern. We've seen a lot more domestic violence.
Yes.
And then, we've obviously seen the economic impacts of this.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be probably the biggest thing to come out of this, because economics really drives the whole world, is, when you're spending trillions of dollars to try to reinvigorate your economy, there's going to have to be a lot of thought about how do we avoid this in the future, and what sort of either economic safeguards and public health safeguards do we really kind of put in play. And so, it'll be interesting to see, how this changes medicine. We've already seen it change in the fact that we have televisits now, right? Like virtual visits or telephone visits.
Yeah.
In food service, you guys have seen it as well with all this takeout stuff that we're doing now that,
right.
You needed that sort of push. We're going to see this, I think, more in education.
Yeah.
I've had some kids learn a lot better through Zoom, and I've had some kids just do terrible. And
right.
so I think we're learning to leverage our technology. I kind of wonder, like, if this pandemic had happened 20 years ago, I think it would have been tremendously more devastating than it is right now, because we just don't have the ability to function as well then as we do now. So I think there's going to be a lot of silver linings that come out of this. From a medical technology perspective, the amount of money that's been put into vaccine research is going to pay dividends, not only in vaccines in the future, but also for other things. For example, we now think that realistically soon we will see gene therapy be more of a thing, where you can have some DNA and infect someone with it, and make a pancreas start making insulin for a kid who's type 1 diabetic.
Okay.
And we'll be able to cure things like type 1 diabetes, which that technology has really been kind of advanced. The vaccines, the way that they're done, especially the new mRNA vaccines, are probably the safest vaccines we've ever had. And from what we can see so far, with kind of longer term side effects. There's a lot more short term side effects because they work so well that they really invigorate your immune system. But that'll be exciting as well, and hopefully, the burden of disease around the nation, around the world, will decrease. And for someone who's been abroad a lot doing medical work, you would be amazed by how many kids and younger people die of preventable causes. It's millions per year. So
very cool. Well, it's neat that you've been able to see all of these different things, especially. I'm sure it's not neat during the time period of it going through, but like being able to look back over your career and say, like, I was part of this when COVID struck, and I was on the inside, like seeing the everyone work together in all these different levels.
Tragedies and adversity does that. It can bring out some of the best in people, and that's always amazing to see. And you do feel like you're doing something historic. I'm the person giving vaccines tomorrow at the free clinic. And it's like, wow, it's like, I don't know, it's like being back in World War II and being part of the war effort, right?
Yeah, it is. It really
is. Like you're excited to play a part in history a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's really neat. It's really cool too, being able to see all the different aspects. I mean, being a doctor, first of all, is not an easy task to become one, and then your work life is not necessarily easy once you are one. And on top of that, you work with the Harbor Free Clinic and all these different things that you're involved in, and so it's really neat to be able to see all these different aspects, and yet you've raised, at least I can attest to at least one of your children who worked for us for a short period of time.
Yeah.
But she was excellent when she was working, and always super great with communication and everything. And so you've done a really good job. It seems on the home front and professional front.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Again, San Camano has been a great place to raise a family. We've academically, our kids have had some wonderful opportunities. Socially, it's been amazing. And again, I would just encourage everyone to find a way to give back. Find what your skill sets are and find a way to give back to your community. One of the things that Brandon was going to ask me was what if I could have any message on a billboard on Camano Island, what would it say? And I thought a lot about this, and there's a quote by Coretta Scott King that says, "The greatness of a community is most accurately measured by the compassionate actions of its members." And in a world where I really feel like compassion is lacking in general, I think it's not lacking here in our community.
Yeah.
And I always like to say, and we say this for the free clinic, that if we can do this on Stanwood and Camano, people can do this anywhere in the world. And so, it's all about how do you love your neighbor? How do you work well within your community? And there's a lot of bad stuff that happens to people, but how do you rise beyond that? And how do you rise beyond your differences, right?
Yeah.
And how do you kind of all come together? And that's important.
Yeah. And I think that overall or overarching message of being able to be optimistic and have hope in all of that is very important, because I think that's a really difficult thing to do sometimes. When you start getting into the weeds and you start seeing all the little cracks in the armor and stuff, you can really get discouraged, and seeing the community step up and help out in the ways they have.
Well, again, everyone's core need is to be loved, and and so loving your neighbor is I think why this is the second commandment, right? It's the greatest commandment. It's just that's what people need to be able to thrive, and I think that's what we want for everyone.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I'd like to end every podcast with some rapid-fire questions. You've answered the last one, but we're going to start on the first one. What purchase of $100 or less have you enjoyed the most over the last 3 months?
I took a couple of friends out for lunch that I hadn't seen in a long time, and it was great. I really appreciate that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to eat in a restaurant again.
Absolutely. It was fun.
Very cool. Pretend you have a friend coming from out of town. What would the first day look like here?
Yeah, so Camano is really cool, and I think one of the big things I like to do is kind of get out in nature. And so, I would take them around to all the different state parks we have, Camano. Take them down to English Boom, take them out to the Forest Preserve, take them out to Barnum Point.
Yeah.
Like Brandon, I think eating is great too, and so there's a lot of fun little spots to eat, whether it's here at the Camano Commons down at Taft, or at the Camano Beach Lodge.
Yeah.
And then for people that are kind of interested in kind of those quirky things, there's a lot of cool quirky things on Camano, right? There's everyone's got to stop by see Jack Gunter's gallery, Carla Matsky's gallery.
Yeah.
There's an orchid farm on Camano. There's a Camano Island fruit orchards, which is amazing. There's all sorts of these little kind of quirky places that they're just kind of fun to visit. So there's more to do than just a day.
Yeah, for sure. All right. And who is an interesting person in this community that I should interview next?
Have you interviewed Jack Gunter yet?
No, I haven't.
So there is no more interesting person on Camano than Jack Gunter, and I hope he's listening to this, because I think he would agree with that. So he's also a great community guy. I know he's been Stanwood Camano Person of the Year before. He's also given a lot to this community, and he's got a lot of great perspective. So that's your next challenge, Brandon. Brandon is to find him.
Sounds good.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Brandon, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having.
Yeah. And Islanders, I will talk to you on the next one. Well, a big thank you to Dr. Jimmy for joining me on the podcast today, and thank you for listening. If you haven't already, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us be found by other Islanders like yourself. And for more information on this episode, you can go to CamanoCommons.com/EP89. That's CamanoCommons.com/EP89. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.